This is Glenn Pethel. Hi, this is Glenn Pethel, Gwinnett County Public Schools, and thank you, John, for that introduction. And thank you for introducing today's participants to the work of the Wallace Foundation. I hope that you are seeing a slide that shows the Wallace Foundation's theory of change. And I want to explain the theory of change used by the Wallace Foundation. Based in New York City, the Wallace Foundation is one of the nation's largest independent charitable foundations. It has a national focus on expanding opportunities for learning and enrichment. And as a steward of limited resources relative to the problems the foundation works to help solve, Wallace has adopted a consistent approach in all of their work. They use knowledge as a lever to help institutions beyond those they fund directly to improve their effectiveness. This webinar is an example of that. The Wallace Approach is to look for opportunities to develop new insights and evidence in areas of interest, to fund real-world tests of innovative concepts, and then disseminate what is learned nationally to policymakers and those who work on the ground providing services. When you look at the top box, understanding the context, what this means in practice is that most projects start with trying to identify important unanswered questions in our fields of interest by working to understand the context in which grantees will operate. The second box, generating improvements and insights, helps to illustrate how Wallace identifies promising ideas for possible solutions to some of the most difficult problems in our society and to give grants to organizations to put those ideas to the test. And the third and final box, catalyzing broad impact. Since 2000, Wallace has sought to improve the effectiveness of principals who they believe are key to raising the quality of urban schools. Currently, the Wallace Foundation is in the midst of a $75 million principal pipeline initiative designed to help 6 school districts create a large core of instructional leaders. In other words, those principals whose main task is to improve teaching and learning and who are good at doing just that. So let's take a moment, look back over time, at least since the year 2000, to better understand where we are today with the Wallace Foundation. And Aaron is going to describe some of the work and some of the results of that work that occurred during the decade 2000 to 2010.
Thank you, Dr. Pethel, for the introduction to the work of the Wallace Foundation. As we heard Dr. Pethel say, Wallace's Educational Leadership Initiative began in 2000, and for 10 years until 2010, the Wallace Foundation invested approximately $300 million to investigate the question of principal impact. This was a big bet on their part. They wanted to find out if principals have an impact on teachers and students, and if so, what is the extent of that impact. During this 10-year time frame, the Wallace Foundation funded initiatives across 26 states and 15 urban school districts. The initiatives were funded to fill the knowledge gaps and to provide opportunities to evaluate practices across sites. Professional learning communities were important strategies in filling the knowledge gaps and were developed across states, districts, and among partners. This work resulted in over 70 research reports, some that we will reference in several moments, 140 high-quality initiatives, and the creation of 15 new nonprofit organizations. Michelle is going to talk us through the lessons learned during this 10 years of research.
Thank you, Erin. The results of the Wallace Foundation's research are, number one, education leadership does make a difference in school improvement and student achievement. So focusing on school leaders is cost-effective for districts. and this focus must be centered on 5 research-based practices of effective leaders. Highly effective leaders shape the school's vision, create a climate hospitable to education, cultivate leadership in others, improve instruction, and manage people, data, and processes. High-quality training for school leaders is essential and can be directly linked to school success. The Wallace Foundation identified 5 essential components of effective programs. These will be shared later in the presentation. The third major impact of the research is that school districts are where change happens. The research identified main functions needed by districts to support leadership and revealed that the concept of district as consumer is a promising strategy to improve programs. So what was learned from this big bet investment? Leadership does matter in our schools. Principals do have an impact, second only to teachers. So if we know there are certain levers that push, move, change, improve student achievement, then we must use the 2 most effective ones, teachers and leaders, to increase learning opportunities for our students.
Many of us have believed that strong, effective school leadership is critical to student performance, and the studies commissioned by the Wallace Foundation shown on this slide show that that is true. First, in 2004, Kenneth Leithwood and colleagues learned that leadership is second only to classroom instruction among those factors that contribute to what students learn at school. 6 years later, the claim was reinforced in a follow-up report by the same group of researchers.
Absolutely, Erin. Principals are key to teaching quality. Linda Darling-Hammond said in Preparing School Leaders for a Changing World, it is the leader who both recruits and retains high-quality staff. Indeed, the #1 reason for teachers' decisions about whether to stay in a school is the quality of administrative support, and it is the leader who must develop this organization. But how do we see, how can we measure the impact of school leaders? It is through the development of the school organization, the creation of a positive school culture and climate, and ultimately through the work of teachers and their direct impact on student achievement that this impact is felt.
So what do effective principals do? We can find direction in a Wallace Foundation funded report from January 2012. In the report entitled "The School Principal as Leader, Guiding Schools to Better Teaching and Learning," we learned that there are key behaviors that principals, and especially those who are highly effective, demonstrate to bring about that positive impact on the school and on the children at the school. These 5 key behaviors include shaping a transformational vision of academic success for all children. The effective principal is one who creates a hospitable climate, a place that is engaging for students, for teachers, for parents, and for the community at large. Another important key behavior of these highly effective individuals is that they manage people, they manage data, and they manage processes extremely well. A fourth and equally important behavior is that the principal is about the business of improving instruction. And they go about that business by leading others in professional learning communities, recognizing the value and the strength that the learning community is a key strategy for bringing others on board in this process of improving instruction. And the fifth and again equally important key behavior is that the highly effective principal is a person who cultivates leaderships in others. Over time, we've had many leadership gurus and experts tell us that highly effective leaders are those who do develop others around them. And once again, we find that in this report, that leading the leadership team in sharing leadership is an important key characteristic. But knowing these key behaviors is not enough. We know that a good leader is still hard to find, and we point to several reports over the past several years. In a report Beyond the Pipeline from 2003, we learned that there was no shortage of certified principals, and many of us can identify with that statement. But we add, there is a shortage of qualified principals. In other words, drawing the distinction between quantity and quality. In yet another report from 2007, superintendents from across the country said that they were having a difficult time finding those qualified individuals. 50% of the superintendents surveyed indicated they were having difficulty finding those high-quality individuals to fill principal roles. And the situation grows even dimmer in those large urban school districts, where 61% of our superintendents said that they could not find the leaders that they needed. And then finally, from a report in 2010, the report that there needs to be a match between the district's needs and the leaders that the programs produce. The interpretation or translation of this statement is that school districts and institutions of higher ed, especially those that prepare individuals for school leadership, should be much closer together, that programs should be aligned with district needs, that districts should take a much greater voice in these preparation programs. So much is now known about the impact that principals can have on schools and on students. So the answer is simple. Simply find the right person to lead our school. But we know in reality that finding the right person is a complex issue. And that leads to a big question.
You're exactly right, Dr. Pethel. So after a decade of funding and research, this leaves us with a big unanswered question. If an urban district and its principal training programs provide large numbers of talented aspiring principals with the right pre-service training and on-the-job evaluation and supports, will the result be a pipeline of principals able to improve teaching quality and student achievement, especially in schools where we have the greatest needs?
So the Wallace Foundation began a new initiative in mid-2011, the Principal Pipeline Initiative, which includes 4 components that are of high quality, aligned, scaled district-wide, and supports district reform agenda, the long-term strategic plan of the district. The goal of this 6-year project is to dig deeper into these components to uncover the impact of a focus on, 1, leadership standards that are based on effective leadership characteristics, 2, high-quality aspiring leader training programs that focus on recruiting and selecting only high-potential aspiring leaders, district and or partner training programs that are rigorous, hands-on, individualized, and incorporates the real work of school leaders. Selective hiring means appointing only the most qualified candidates from the deep bench of trained applicants. And finally, evaluation and on-the-job support that is reflective of district standards and focuses on building the leader's capacity to increase student achievement in his or her school.
So who is involved in this new Principal Pipeline Initiative? I'm pleased to tell you that Gwinnett County Public Schools in Georgia is one of the 6 pipeline districts. The other districts include Hillsborough County Public Schools in Florida, the New York City Department of Education in New York, Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, North Carolina, Prince George's County Public Schools, Maryland, and Denver Public Schools, Colorado. This Principal Pipeline Initiative professional learning community involves key individuals and key organizations needed to accomplish the goals and to bring those resources to the table to help figure out the best practice for improving Principal Pipeline. This slide also shows many other organizations engaged by the Wallace Foundation in this work. It includes many of our nation's thought leaders and includes our friends at the National Association of Secondary School Principals. I think you would agree with me this is a very impressive group of organizations and individuals, and a group that I contend would be clearly up to the task. Now Michelle will describe a recent report, again sponsored by the Wallace Foundation.
The information we're sharing today can be found in greater detail in a February 2013 report published by the Wallace Foundation. The report, entitled Districts Matter, Cultivating the Principles Urban Schools Need, is easily retrieved from the Wallace Knowledge Center. Site information will be provided at the end of this presentation.
So this report, District Matters, contends that there are two big tasks that lie ahead for districts who do believe that the training and support of principals can be a high leverage point for school improvement. And that first task is that in the district we will build a large core of well-qualified candidates for the principalship. We sometimes refer to this as the pipeline of future talent. The second big task is that once we have built that core of well-qualified individuals, we have recruited, we have trained, we have supported, and we have selected appropriately, that on the job we will support those school leaders and support them at a very high level. At this time, Erin's going to take a few moments and talk a little bit more in depth about the first major or big task of districts.
The first task outlined is to build a core of well-qualified candidates. There are four components that fall within this task. The first is what principals need to know for better instruction. The second is to improve pre-service training. We also need to identify the most promising future leaders and match them to schools. And we also need to ensure that hard-to-staff schools get the top quality leaders. So we're going to take each of these four components and look at each of them at a deeper level.
So the first step is what principals need to know for better instruction. Drawing upon a set of standards is the necessary prelude to building a core of able principals. The standards spell out what leaders need to know and do to improve instruction, providing a clear description of the principal's job. These standards also undergird training for future principals, hiring practices, and the way in which leaders are supported and managed on the job. This pyramid shows the ISLIC standards as the necessary foundation. Nearly all states have adopted some form of these standards that lay out a set of competencies school leaders need to succeed in improving instruction. Many districts rely on their state's leadership standards. Others have enacted standards tailored to their specific needs and conditions. New York City created a definition of high-quality leadership. In Gwinnett, we defined our standards through our description of a quality plus leader. The third or top tier of this pyramid is the creation of a clearly stated, easily understood job description. The process allows districts to establish high expectations through a clear and transparent job description that leads to results that are not quick or easy, but highly significant.
Improving pre-service training is another critical component of building our core of qualified leaders. If you are a district and you want to matter, as this report is titled, you need to think about your district standards and what you want your principals to be able to do. What traits, characteristics, and competencies are you looking for? What knowledge and skills do you want your principals to have? Once you've clarified the standards, those should be translated into training. In Gwinnett County Public Schools, we have an Aspiring Leader program and an Aspiring Principal program. Districts can and should work collaboratively together and with partner universities or regional facilities to develop this training. And in speaking of looking at university partnerships, this is a way to enhance pre-service training. Formalizing the partnership is critical through memorandums of understanding. Protocols like those used through quality measures can facilitate conversations. It's important to remember that we are the consumers, so we should have an active voice in this process and the curriculum offered through university programs.
I think that's great advice, Erin, and I'm going to build on that and talk a little bit more about those university partners and the importance of those partners. But the third element of this first big task facing districts is that we identify our most promising future leaders and that we do a very appropriate job of matching those individuals to our schools. And there are three specific elements that I want to talk about under this particular component. The first is ensuring that the district has given much thought to the selection process and that appropriate procedures, processes, and protocols that have been developed that fit the district's need to ensure that the selection process is a systematic process, one that in time we could prove is both a reliable and valid process, and certainly one that is also legally permissible in all appropriate ways. The second element in this area is considering the use of assessment strategies and screening tools. In our district, we have used the National Association of Secondary School Principals Assessment Center process or approach for many years and have enjoyed much success and again are strong proponents of this opportunity to do a better job, a more reliable and more valid job of assessing our future leaders. We also use the Gallup organization's Principal Insight tool, and we've also developed our own internal structured assessment and screening tools to include writing exercises. That leads us to the third, and that is the element of the preferred provider. In our district, we've made a concerted effort to engage our institutions of higher ed to collaborate with us as a major employer of school leaders. And we have asked them to collaborate on their pedagogy, on the design of residencies and internships. And we're fortunate that many of our universities came to the table to collaborate willingly. And those universities are those that we now identify as our preferred provider. And so much so that we're very vocal and very public about that. We have created a consumer's guide to leadership preparation program, simply to give those who are aspiring, those who are seeking those advanced degrees in leadership, at least have our best thinking and the processes and protocols that we put in place to assess those preferred providers.
And the fourth step is ensure that hard-to-staff schools get top quality leaders. And that must include these three interlocking pieces. Ann Clark, a colleague of ours and the Deputy Superintendent in Charlotte-Mecklenburg Public Schools, states business and industry leaders do not flinch at the idea of placing top talent in struggling departments and divisions. This is not always the case in public education. Her assertion is borne out by research. Many studies have shown the inequitable distribution of teacher quality, which disadvantages the poor, the non-white, and the low-achieving students. Similarly, others suspect the same inequitable distribution of principal quality. However, recruiting top principals for high-need schools is not an easy task. But if high-quality leadership is key to turning around these schools, that picture must change. The starting point is to recognize that such schools typically require a greater investment. This may include giving incentives to top-flight principals and teachers to take on the task of turning around the district's lowest performing schools. These incentives may include bonuses or other forms of compensation, such as time. Giving principals flexibility in staffing is key. This may include allowing principals with a strong track record to recruit their own teams of high-performing teachers, literacy facilitators and coaches, and assistant principals. And finally, we must provide for differentiation. This may include allowing principals to have some latitude from the standards that the district has, the rules and the processes for everyone else. The decisions at these schools must be based on the work and the needs of the school.
Thank you, Michelle. Now that we've had a chance to dig deeper into Task 1, how we build a larger core of well-qualified candidates, let's turn our attention to Task 2, supporting school leaders on the job. The components within this task are first to develop fair and reliable performance evaluations. We need to mentor novice principals and provide professional development to all principals. We need to provide usable data and training. Another component is to enable principals to use time for instruction. And finally, as a component of this task, we need to plan for succession. As we did with Task 1, we're now going to look at each of these components on a deeper level.
Thank you, Erin. So the first component in this second big task for districts is to develop fair, reliable performance evaluations. And for those of you who are thinking that this is so such common sense that we would do this, it's sometimes interesting that some of the simplest things become some of the most complex. And in this case, we see at least 5 steps in that process of developing fair, reliable performance evaluation, each important in and of itself. The first is that the evaluation should focus on the most important behaviors and actions that improve instruction, and that those are those behaviors and actions that find their anchor in leader standards, those standards that we talked about earlier in the presentation, whether those standards are local, state, or even national standards. A second important step in this development of fair and reliable evaluations is that the emphasis be on school change. And I would add that it be on school improvement and having the positive impact on students. The third step in the process of developing fair and reliable evaluations is that there must be accompanying companion tools and processes that have been developed over time and tested for their reliability and validity. A very important point for any individual, regardless of profession, but one that's really important for those of us in the business of education, is that we identify through the evaluation process the opportunities for us to grow and for us to develop. So an appropriate evaluation system is one that does identify and provide the opportunity to address an individual's need. And the fifth and final step is that a fair, reliable performance evaluation system have multiple measures of student and school performance.
And once we have results from these performance evaluations, we must mentor novice principals and provide professional development to all principals. A distinguishing trait of the world's best school systems, those that regularly outperform the school systems in the U.S., is that they invest in high-quality preparation, mentoring, and professional development. The fact is, however, that historically principal professional development has ranked low on the priority list for many districts, especially in tough times when school systems may face the alternative of reductions in areas more immediately linked to the classroom. However, we suggest we must provide mentoring for all novice principals for at least a year. We must use assessment data to shape the development of principals and assistant principals and provide regular expert help individually or in networks to improve performance. And by providing these novice principals mentors, we can help them improve by building their leadership and instructional capacity.
Another way we need to support school leaders is to provide them with usable data and training. Most school districts have gotten the message that they need to be more data-driven. The problem is that you can get lost in the data, but having mountains of data isn't the same as having useful information to act on, and this is where the balancing act occurs, as seen in the illustration on the screen. Data systems are important and must be in place. Ensuring data exists in a variety of forms is also important. But equally important are the elements that we show under the information heading. Principals and school leadership teams must have the skills, developed through training, to identify and solve pressing instructional challenges and to use data to have an impact. To solve these challenges, principals and teams must have the time and opportunity to do the work. This may come in the form of structured time for teams to work in professional learning communities, to use the data to identify, address, and take collective responsibility for learning problems of specific groups of underachieving students. Some districts require schools to set aside blocks of time each week for these data-driven discussions. Districts need to provide the time, training, and opportunity to ensure that data can be used to answer the so what question and maintain a focus on student achievement.
So Aaron, looking at your seesaw, looking at that balance, reminded me of the thought of how many times we have said to ourselves and said to others, if I only had more time. If I only had the time, I would focus more on teacher observation. More time perhaps providing formative evaluation opportunities. So one of the important tasks that we have before us as a district is to enable principals to use the time that we have for instruction. And how do we do that? The time to focus on instruction is a relentless search by most principals. A school leader's typical day includes a string of crises and non-instructional routines. The lunch menu, the lunch schedule, the happy parent, the unhappy parent, the student discipline issues, and the questions by all of the teachers who want to talk with us. Research has found that a principal is apt to spend 1/3 or less of their day or week on instructional matters. That simply has to change. The first step in focusing on instructional leadership is to recognize how time is spent each day, each week. Once we understand how our time is spent, then we need coaching. Coaching on how to delegate those many distracting, non-instructional tasks. And finally, our colleagues, the employees around us, need to learn how to work effectively as a team, but with the goal not to help them and protect their time, but with the goal of protecting the principal's time. At least one response to this time dilemma has been the School Administrator Manager Process, or SAM as it's sometimes called. This process was created over a decade ago in Jefferson County, Louisville, Kentucky, with the support of the Wallace Foundation, and today can be found in use in over 80 school districts across the United States. The process is being piloted in our district, and the early returns from our principals is that the SAM process, when exercised with fidelity, does in fact provide that principal with more time in their daily and weekly schedule to focus on instructional matters.
And the final step in this task is the need to plan for succession. Principal turnover is inevitable. Retirements, promotions, transfers, and removal from the position all contribute to the problem. The real concern is frequent unplanned changes in school leadership, something no district wants. How can districts lessen the negative impact of rapid leader transition? Step one is to develop a pipeline of talent. We call that building a deep bench of well-qualified candidates for the principalship. This step begins with identifying early in individuals' careers those who have the potential to become principals and develop them through appropriate training and mentoring needed to enhance their potential. Step two focuses on distributing leadership and building strong leadership teams in schools to foster continuity even if the principal leaves. Districts have the responsibility to provide training and support to staff members as they assume new leadership roles. Step three focuses on providing principals flexibility to ensure they have the right leadership team. This may include allowing principals to bring in their own leadership team to smooth the transition and speed school improvement. Step four emphasizes the district's vision to ensure orderly transfer of responsibilities. This may include a formalized transition plan that outlines or specifies school, district, and individual responsibilities and tasks. And the last step, step five, focuses on the engagement of all staff in this most important district task. The success of an orderly transfer is dependent upon the superintendent and district staff to ensure that the right talent is ready at the right time.
So now we have brought you through the steps in those two big tasks that we identified earlier in our presentation. Those two big tasks that are important for school districts to attend to if we are to go about this business of finding, recruiting, identifying, selecting, and supporting those highly effective school leaders that we all want for our schools, for our teachers, and for our students. Today we have described the actions that school districts can take to ensure that principals are well trained when hired and fully supported when placed on the job. The evidence also underscores three other points. One, in successful schools, leadership and authority do not reside in any single person or any single position. The most enduring improvements occur through the consistent, shared exercise of leadership by many in the school community and at the district central office. The second point, leadership building actions are interdependent and will likely fall short if done haphazardly or in isolation. Standards only matter if the district uses them to govern principal training, principal hiring, and assessment. And little good will ever come of data unless districts train principals in data's proper use. And the third and final point, in the steps that we've described and those that are contained within this Wallace Foundation report, do involve cost. And just as often, they involve tough choices for school districts. And those tough choices become even more difficult and even more complex when budgets are tight. So the process of finding those highly qualified individuals, those principals who will make a difference, who will leverage all of the key behaviors that we described earlier today, yes, there is a cost, but we maintain that it's more than a cost. It's a huge investment in the future. We've enjoyed the opportunity this afternoon to present information from this Wallace Foundation supported report. We're very proud of the fact that we are one of the 6 Wallace Foundation Principal Pipeline Initiative districts, and we encourage you to contact us if anything we've said has fostered additional questions. We look forward to your questions, to your comments, and would gladly entertain the opportunity to speak with you more at length. At this time, I'll turn the program back over to the moderator.
Thank you, Glenn, Michelle, and Aaron. That was a really enlightening and clear overview of the Wallace Foundation work. And I do have a few questions that have come in from the audience that I'd like to have one or more of you respond to. The first one is, where can I find some examples of leader standards that were referenced?
Oh, that's a great question. We've got a great resource for you. It is in the Wallace Foundation Knowledge Center, and in particular, there we go, and in particular, you'll see the site here. Their Knowledge Center includes many, many wonderful works that will support your work in the development, training, and support of leaders. But in particular, there is a very recent report that contains the leader standards that you will find in all 6 of the principal pipeline initiative districts. And I think this is a wonderful foundation, wonderful beginning point, because all 6 of the districts have done extensive work, and as we indicated in our presentation earlier today, many, if not all of us, starting with those ISLIC standards.
Thank you, Glenn. Now, here's another question that's come in. Where can I find more information about how districts, Gwinnett in particular, are working with the university providers?
Again, great question, we would love to provide more information on this. I mentioned in the presentation that we have a consumer's guide, and you can find that in our district, but probably the easiest way would be to contact one of us and allow us to send that. My colleagues are reminding me that that consumer's guide can be accessed on our website, on the Gwinnett County Public Schools website. So that would probably be the first step. But there are also some other things that we do, some of the protocols that we and our partner universities are using that would probably require a more extensive conversation than time allows today.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. In your experience, what are some of the greatest challenges in accomplishing the 2 big tasks outlined in the presentation today?
Thank you, John, again. I think that's a great question, because I think sometimes we walk away from a presentation like this, and hopefully we are inspired and we're motivated and we want to do something. But I appreciate the question, because perhaps on the surface it may seem simple, but in reality it's very complex. And so the first, and I think the most formidable challenge, is ensuring that you truly believe, you truly understand, and you truly support this idea that principals are second only to teachers in terms of impact on students. Again, that may sound very simple. Maybe I've oversimplified it, but it's so easy to say that you believe that, but be unwilling to back your words up with actions, being unwilling to back up your words with funding, backing up your words with support. So I think that's the most formidable challenge, because we've got a whole array of things that we can be interested in, that we might be wanting to do. And at least in my experience, I've tried to caution individuals that there's no magic potion, there's not a magic pill or pixie dust that makes this happen. It requires a very deeply held belief that leaders do make a difference with children.
Thank you, Glenn. The last question we have time for is, where can I learn more about the 5 research-based principal behaviors that were described in the presentation?
Again, a great question. We would point you again to the Wallace Foundation, wallacefoundation.org, and specifically their Knowledge Center. Again, I can't say enough good things about the Wallace Foundation and their work and how they have demonstrated, I think, a high degree of fidelity to their theory of change. So within their Knowledge Center, you will find a number of downloadable publications, but in particular 2 that deal with these 5 key behaviors. The School Principal as Leader, that's a Wallace Foundation 2013 publication, and a 2012 publication, The Making of the Principal, 5 Lessons in Leadership Training. Both of those are excellent publications and will give you much greater information.
Thank you again. I'd like to remind the audience that this webinar is the 3rd in a series of webinars that NASSP has broadcast with the sponsorship of the Wallace Foundation. Beginning tomorrow, all 3 of them will be accessible at www.nassp.org/webinarsvideo. And if we can move on to the last slide, Glenn, I'd like to just say one quick word to our audience about our Ignite 14 conference. We're in Denver from February 6th through 8th. The website that you see at the bottom of that slide will give you all the information about registration and who the speakers are and what some of the activities there will be. And I'd like to invite all of you to join us in Dallas, February 6th through 8th. Again, I want to thank our panelists today, Glenn and Aaron and Melissa. You were just outstanding, and I can't thank you enough for the presentation. And thank those of you who signed in today to be part of our webinar.